Welcome to the 1 Minute Apologist. We interview the world's leading apologists to provide credible answers to curious questions. Welcome to the 1 Minute Apologist. My name is Bobby Conway. I am here with Mary Jo Sharp, and we're going to be doing a little Unplugged with Mary Jo. It's good to have you, Mary Jo, on the program.
Wonderful to be here.
Let's just let our audience get acclimated to who you are a little bit. I'd like just to have you tell us your story. I know that you were a professed atheist at one point who became a Christian. Can you just kind of share with us your story, how you got to that place of becoming a Christian and what life was like without Christ beforehand?
Yeah, I like, by the way, I like acclimated, like you got to get used to me, right? Yeah. I like that.
Yeah. Well, you know, got to warm up to Mary Jo here, folks. I mean.
But let me take you back. I'm from the Portland, Oregon area. I grew up in a home with parents. I've talked to them about this. They were agnostic by the time that I was very little. They used to go to church, but by the time I was too little to remember, they stopped going to church. So I wasn't raised in church. I know with a name like Mary Jo, you think, oh, she's from the South, been raised in the church, born and raised in the
Louisiana.
church. Yeah, but I'm not. I actually wasn't raised in church, and I'm not from the South. Yeah. So, Portland's just a different feel. It's very relativistic when I was there, growing up in the 80s and 90s. Very relativistic. People were very private about their beliefs. You know, that's nice for you, but it's not for me, and don't push it on me. And we don't talk about it really, you know. So I didn't really have much. I didn't have a upbringing steeped in Christian culture. Right. That's the other thing. You know, we didn't have churches on every street corner. Or I like to tease the Texans, I like to say, or Tex-Mex restaurants, you know, on every street corner, or gas stations, right? Yeah, that's right. So it's just a very different feel up there. And I really didn't, rather than being a professed atheist, I would say I was like a non-theist. Because I hadn't actually said, what does the worldview of atheism entail, and embraced that, you know? I didn't think about God. I didn't know why it was necessary to think about God, and he just wasn't on the radar at all. Yeah. So it was just, I was very much brought up to love the arts, and I'm a musician. I play saxophone, and so I'm a band nerd. I was in band. I taught public school band for 8 years, and actually I had a band director who I just loved. I wanted to teach kids the way that he taught. I wanted to teach them a love of music. I didn't know that he was a Christian, and I was seeing some of that passion of his love of God come out in his love of teaching and his love of people. But I wanted to be like him. And my senior year, he felt burdened to give me a Bible. And it was a NIV 1-year Bible. And he said, when you go off to college, you're going to have hard questions, and I hope you'll turn to this. And he gave me that Bible. And he also gave me a baton, a conducting baton, which all the band nerds out there will know what I'm talking about, with which he used to conduct the band the first time we ever won state band contest. So it was a very important moment, you know, for me. And it meant a lot to me. And at that time in my life, I really had questions about, really, is this all there is? I had grown up watching Nova with Carl Sagan, right? So I'm just on a pale blue dot in a vast universe. And that started to have its effect on me. What's the outworking of that? Mm-hmm. You know, when I'm upset, when I'm sad, does it really matter? Mm-hmm. Why? Why does it matter? And I began to have some questions. And at that point in my life, here comes this band director who I admire, and he hands me this Bible. So I read that Bible, and I actually became a believer in God through reading through that NIV 1-year Bible. I didn't become a believer in Jesus Christ. I hadn't trusted Jesus yet. I really didn't get Jesus altogether.
You moved from non-theism to theism.
Yeah. Actually, I moved into thinking, wow, there's a creature that created, or being, a creature, but a being that created all of this. And I began to go, wow, and I might be morally accountable to that being. And that being's a powerful being, because if he created this universe, you know, I've been growing up on all those science shows. He can create stars way more powerful than our sun. So this is a being that I need to consider, and not consider just lightly. So I went off to college, and for the first time, I started going to church on my own. Mm-hmm. I had been dragged to church a few times by a boyfriend. His parents said I couldn't date him unless I went to church with them, and I went.
Acquiesced.
Yeah, I went. He was worth it, and I went and slept through the sermons. And I thought, these are really nice people, but this is not anything for me. And so I went off at college. Is the first time I really started to explore on my own what I believed, and I went to a few churches on my own. I really didn't still understand Jesus, or that I didn't feel like I was a sinner, or I didn't understand any of that. I didn't understand that trusting in Jesus. What was I trusting in him for? And then kind of got away from it, from going to church for a while, met my husband. And boy, I knew right off the bat I was going to marry that guy. I did. He was great. I don't make those decisions very often. I'm an apologist.
There you go, Roger.
I tend to overanalyze, right?
Yeah.
So, I can't even buy like a kitchen towel without going, what's the cost and the value and what color and does this, is this really what I want? And here's my husband and I'm just, wow, I'm going to marry this guy. But I met him and about a year or so after that, we got married. About a year or so after that, that's what I was saying. We got invited to a church by one of his friends. Mm-hmm. And at that church, the pastor really broke down who Jesus was, who I am in light of who Jesus is. And I began to understand my position as needing salvation, as being in need of salvation through Jesus Christ. And that was when I was actually convicted and I trusted in God as my Savior.
So just helping us, as a person who was a non-theist, to use your term, right?
Yeah.
What was it? Was it that day? I mean, did you ever experience guilt before that, Mary Jo? I mean, this idea of guilt working in your life of, man, I feel like I've done something wrong. In the spirit of Romans 2, your conscience. Was that just kind of not there in the years before that and it just became real all of a sudden, or was it heightened, magnified? Talk to us just a little bit about that.
Yeah, the moral law, the law is written on all of our hearts. And so obviously I actually call myself a recovering legalist. And I don't mean legalist in just, you're one of those religious people that are legalistic. I mean like in life, even before I became a believer in God, I would always follow the rules. So I obviously had an understanding of guilt and doing things that were right because it was right to do, but I just didn't have a grounding for that. I didn't understand. I'd never thought, well, where am I getting that from? Yeah. And is that actually real? And if it is a real, if it's real and not just something I'm creating, if it's not delusional, then how is it real? Where am I getting that from? And I think that's when I went to the church where I started to understand what that guilt was. And I started to understand that, what sin was. I had never actually been introduced to what sin was. So that's something I wouldn't have, if you had said you're a sinner and you need salvation, I would have looked at you like, what are you even talking about? I don't know what those words are.
So this began to connect the dots for you. When you hear that, you become a Christian. So now help us to understand how Mary Jo's going to be set out on a journey to become a Christian apologist. Where did your appetite for apologetics come from? Were you involved with a lot of that before you became a believer, or was that kind of more post your salvation experience where this really became something that you wanted to consume?
Yeah, it definitely post experience. What happened was my husband and I got involved in ministry. I'm smiling right now because being in ministry can be very hard. And what I saw over the years, the early years of being in youth and music ministry, was that people in the church who profess the Bible as God's word, those people who were saying, this is the truth. The Bible teaches us to love one another greatly and to be slow to anger and abounding in love. And, the way that we're supposed to treat one another. I was reading that, but I wasn't seeing it in the church. And in fact, some of the experiences that I had with other believers in the church were the most harmful, most hurtful experiences I had ever had. Even with my atheist friends, I had never had anything that hurtful or hateful said to me. So this was causing me some emotional doubt. I'm not seeing any real believers. Obviously I'm not looking out at the world like at Mother Teresa, right? I'm not looking at Billy Graham. But in my experience, I'm going, where are the real believers? Then I started to go, well, why do I say I believe in God? You see, you see that emotional doubt caused by experiences in the church. And then I'm starting to reflect on myself going, well, what reasons do I have for believing in God? Yeah. What really did I do back then when I say that I was convicted? What really happened? Do I know that Jesus rose from the dead? How do I know that? Do I know God exists? How do I know that? So I actually, I began to search for answers to those questions. Nobody was handling them in my church. I'd never been exposed to a thing called doubt. And I began to have all these doubts and I didn't have an outlet for them. But fortunately, somebody in our church had bought Norm Geisler's book, Christian Apologetics, and put it in our library. And I went searching for something that had answers to these kind of questions. And I came across that book. And I opened it up and I began to read it. And I realized as a band director, working 70-hour or more weeks, I wasn't going to be able to go through Norm Geisler's book, right? I wasn't going to be able to do this right now. And so I took it back because I realized I wasn't working through it. And yes, I'm ashamed. But I took it back and I went, I found The Case for Christ. Same library, our church library. Somebody bought that. So I started reading Lee Strobel's work and I went, wow, I got it. I understood it. He wrote it in a way where I could get it, pretty quick. And then I could I could understand it. That's what I mean by get it. I was understanding the arguments. And no slam on you, Norman Geisler. That was my bad. But I went to look at all these people he interviewed. I started reading what they had written. And then I thought, you can't just go and read what the Christian answers are, right? If you're really going to investigate this, you got to see what the rebuttals are. So I started listening to the debates like between William Lane Craig and some atheist philosophers. And I think one of them was Austin Dacey. And I think I've got his name right. It's been a while since I heard that one. But I started listening to these. I would drive back and forth from the junior high to high school to teach both bands. And I would listen to this on the way back and forth. Yeah. And I began to understand that the atheist arguments they didn't provide a consistent, coherent worldview. Mm-hmm. And that the Christian arguments that I had been so excited to find were actually the best arguments. And I went, man, I bet other people need to know this. I bet other Christians have doubts because I bet they've had experiences in the church that were harmful or, hurtful to them. And that they might be trying to work through some of these issues. Well, why do I say I believe in God? And so I started to teach an apologetics class in my church because I was super excited. And my husband helped me teach that. And then I really got involved with that's involved, right? I'm teaching apologetics in the church.
Absolutely.
But then one of the things I had done to find answers was I got a subscription to the Christian Research Journal. Mm-hmm. And I was reading through some of their articles. I saw an advertisement for Biola, the university there. And it was a Master of Arts in Christian Apologetics. And for the second time in my life, I said, wow, I'm going to do this. Remember, I was like my husband the first time. Yeah. Wow, I'm going to marry that guy. This is only the second time this has happened to me.
Really sensed it.
Yeah, I'm going to go get a Master of Arts in Christian Apologetics. And my husband said, what is that? And I said, well, it's like studying the defense of the faith. It's all this stuff I've been studying. And I noticed that everybody that was going to be teaching there was somebody I'd already been studying. Yeah. So I went and did that. And the whole ministry kind of comes out of the fact that there was a homework assignment to do a blog or do a private email conversation on the resurrection to defend it. And I took the private email because I didn't have to be a public Christian that way, right? I had my little private email, defend the resurrection, would still be good. Nobody would have to know that I was a complete sold out, person for Christ. Yeah. So I did that, but I never felt right about that. And I was like, why don't I feel right about that? And I said, why don't I want to defend my faith in public? Why am I not doing this? Because if it's really that good, it should stand up to the arguments that come at me. Mm-hmm. So I started the blog Confident Christianity in November of 2006. And everything really has come out of that.
Yeah. From that to writing a book and being a professor at Houston Baptist University and traveling around the country and doing this. When I hear you talk about kind of what you were experiencing as you observed the church, it created this emotional doubt in you. And what you really looked to was an argument that kind of on an intellectual level. And what's neat about Christianity, I think, Mary Jo, is there is just the cluster of arguments for us. So for the person who might be struggling with intellectual arguments for the existence of God or this idea of God, do you exist? Well, then sometimes the Christian comes along and they're not living in a way that is ultra hypocritical. They see that person shining and really living, and isn't it interesting? So now the exact opposite thing can be happening. And I'm so grateful that we can kind of go, there's a whole host, a plethora, a myriad of arguments, so to speak, that can help the Christian. If you wouldn't mind, there could be people listening, and how do these arguments, or just apologetics in general, what are some things that you'd want to say to somebody who's maybe a would-be aspirer to Christian apologetics? I mean, how can they begin to start? Where do they start?
Oh, where do they start? I always say start with whatever interests you, right? Because then you're going to keep going. So is your area science? Do you really like the arguments, from, do you like to combat Darwinian worldviews, or what's your area? And for me, the area was God's existence, how do I know that he exists? And the other one was resurrection, because it's the foundation of the Christian faith, without which, the Apostle Paul says, your faith is useless if there's no resurrection. And by the way, an objective statement, right? He's saying it's either true or false. He either rose from the dead or he didn't. See, I'm sneaking apologetics arguments.
And it's verifiable.
That's right.
We'll check out these witnesses.
That's right. So, but yeah, those were the areas that got me excited. And so that kept me going on and, study in my study. You got to have something that lights your fire for what you're interested in. Another way to really get started in apologetics is to talk to people who don't share your views.
Yeah.
Right? To get out there and start doing the ministry, start doing the work, because that will actually guide you into what you should be studying. And actually, people who don't believe like you do, they're better at holding you accountable for what you say you believe than, everybody around you who agrees with you and, oh yeah, I love that argument. That's a fabulous argument. You want to come up against people who are saying, no, here's what I see is wrong with that. And then so you can develop your view better, and you can develop your apologetic. You can make it more sophisticated, growing your understanding of it. So I actually would say start with something that interests you and get out there and start talking to people, start ministering to people, because that's really what apologetics is all about, isn't it? Yeah. It's serving people. It's not about being the smartest person in the room. It's not about showing off fancy words. It's about, or making sure that you thump people with the biggest Bible that you've got, right?
Yeah, that's right.
It's really about ministering to folks.
That's how I got into it too. I just started going out and sharing the gospel with people. People started asking me questions I didn't know, and the Holy Spirit used their questions to sanctify me and disciple me in my walk. So
exactly.
I really appreciate you, Mary Jo. Lord's blessings upon you as you continue to do Christian apologetics and live out the Christian life. And we just thank you so much for your contribution.
Thank you.